from any kind of, background. And you have to understand that capoeira, the way of teaching and the whole science behind it's something it's not that long ago, it's not like karate that there is like a founder years ago. It's something like quite recent. And it's something that I believe there's still a lot evolution to do, like the way that they train. I think overall, is still the same old, like go for a run, and so the way of training there was a lot of, put it like this, back in the day when I was young, you had to prove in a way that you wanted to be a capoeirista. While now, since I moved here to the UK 20 years ago, I try to make anybody, regardless of their skill, that they do a class and they understand a couple of sequences, So like the capoeira, the growth that it really changed the way it's being taught as well.
Yeah, it's a mixed blessing, that, isn't it? On the one hand, it makes it more accessible, but on the other hand, people aren't necessarily having that process of commitment, Like I had one aikido teacher, and for a month he ignored me. For a month he beat me up, and on the third month he started teaching me. And it was like he was like, look, it's like I see a lot of people, a lot of people come through the door. He's like, I want to make sure you're committed, Like he wasn't trying to make it accessible to me, quite the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, it's a give and take. In the end of the day, it's like the market will say, like which strategy works better, right? If you take, like, say you have 100 guys coming through your door and you got to see how it works. Like I try to, make it accessible. And I understand that my commitment to capoeira is one, the commitment of a brand new guy is another. And it's a relationship that has to be started at some point, and you cannot necessarily demand it straight away from, a guy to go like this. But yeah, there's a lot of this idea in capoeira that, this is how I learned. This is how I'm going to teach, which, I try to keep an open mind, because there is a lot of people doing capoeira the relationship to capoeira was really different, Mm-hmm. So like people now from Europe, from United States, from Japan are teaching capoeira, and their relationship with capoeira is different. The way they think about capoeira is different. And in the end of the day is who's going to do better, who's going to have create the environment of, because it's more about creating bonds within the group. The idea, this identity of group is really something strong.
The group is a big deal, huh? So this is another thing I saw that's different about capoeira. It's in a circle, and it had this tribal feel to it. Like in Japanese arts or Chinese arts, you tend to see a hierarchy, and there's a club, there's a dojo, but the group and the kind of quality of togetherness, as a psychologist, it looks like a lot of what's called co-regulation, which is basically people helping each other with their stress. We're in this together, we're doing something synchronized together, like a dance is done. And this reminds me of some like African dances I've seen, this group of like almost tribal kind of quality. That to me is different than stuff that I've seen in this, seems like less European, less Asian.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who believe the capoeira was created as a tool to deal with issues that were faced by, because there's exactly what you say. You go on, you have a tough life. You have to remember, like back in the day, it were like slaves who were doing, or people who had like fishermen. So people from, humble backgrounds were there and would kind of play fight in a rough kind of way. But, in a way today, what it feels like is that whatever is happening in your life, stress, work, family, when you go there, you break a sweat, the whole round thing, the circle things, the holistic thing, something that I think we as a species have been doing this for thousands of years of like dancing and clapping. So it has this, it puts us into the kind of old things that not necessarily we do anymore. But so it's really strong because you can feel the energy sometimes, like the music is there. And we also believe that the music being good makes you play better, the energy, the interaction of everyone. So you definitely like, sometimes I tell my guys, sometimes you come in and you don't really want to go, you're tired, and you just go there, you break a sweat, in the end you play, and then by the end of the class, you totally forgot that how you were feeling before the class going in. So it has this idea of re-energize people and to be able to cope with the everyday life.
Yeah, it reminds me of sort of like, I can imagine like a village, ancestors all together in the village. And if you look at like pagan stuff from Europe, it's a bit like that, or Native American stuff, where people are dancing around a fire maybe, and the elders are there, and then the young people are there. And or sometimes it's one thing I've seen in East Africa is like courtship rituals. All the young men are jumping up and down, and all the women are like cheering and, going on. And it's like a whole thing. And all the old women are there, like gossiping and shouting. And it's like everyone's around in this little circle while this is going on. And and the kids are there, like learning what's happening and how they should behave and going, oh, I'm going to do that when I'm a teenager, And there's like a whole kind of tribal thing. And I think we've really lost that. And it seems to hark back to that in some way. You know what I mean?
Totally. I like to, I've been, thinking a lot about this the last years. And I like to think that capoeira in a way is like an antidote, I believe that capoeira came as a reaction to a system of slavery, a system that was placed by, dividing, even among their own slaves, they would be divided in different roles, right? There would be like the tough worker, the guy in the field, there will be the guy who would be the slave driver, there will be the one that would work inside the house, and they would kind of envy each other for the different, roles that they would have. It was also something that was based on hatred, like the racism, the color, and what capoeira comes back as the opposite of all that, where there was separation and atomizing people. Now what capoeira does, like, boom, it really brings people together regardless of the social background, the ethnic group, the religious beliefs. It really creates this bond among people, which is like, this kind of love, kindness of like, oh, it's really cool. And, like you just make a connection with guys. And for me to be able to have travel and see my culture being respected and people searching this, I've been, there was like a film back in the 90s, Only the Strong, and this film was like one of those films that went straight to the VHS tapes. But that film took capoeira worldwide. That's the reason why I went to Indonesia. That's the reason why the people in Iran started doing capoeira, people in Mozambique. So he really put this he helped spread capoeira out, and it's a film that kind of shows more or less how capoeira would work. But it's just amazing that you go to so many places that are so different, like Japan, Muslim countries.
And something to be proud of as well, right? Like, sometimes definitely. Brazil has this slight insecurity, you know what I mean, towards it. Oh, it's better in America, or my friends always used to say in Brazil, oh, Australia's like Brazil that works. They used to say to me, I want to go to Australia. That was always their fantasy,
What we call the mongrel syndrome of Brazil. They're always looking up to the US or to Europe, something. Yeah. Historically, it was also, I think until the 1920s, the official policy was like, look, we got to really bring more Europeans here to whiten the population. And so like, being white, being equal to being more developed. But it's this whole turn that Brazil is doing. It's like, oh, actually, no, we have a mixed population. We have, a horrible history. I think very few countries will have a history to be proud of, except if you look at the last 200 years. But Brazil is particularly brutal, but even with all that, I think that the only way to step forward is to really look at the past with sincere eyes and try to make it better, because it's right now in Brazil, things are a bit crazy at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, things look a bit crazy at a lot of places, and Brazil has a pretty different take on some of the stuff around race and ethnicity. There was a different form of slavery there than the US, wasn't there? It was quite a different system, as I understand the history of it. I had a black Brazilian friend kind of try and explain it to me once. And then it's like also the sort of fact that most people are some kind of a mix. right? Like in America, it's like you're white or you're black, and there's just a very few people who are mixed, you know? And now you could say on one level, we're all mixed, right? We're all from Africa or whatever, right? But actually in Britain, it's pretty clear. It's like, okay, there's an Asian girl, that guy's a black guy, that guy's a white guy. Whereas in Brazil, there's shades. And it's like every single person is some kind of a mix. It's very rare you see someone, especially someone like Rio, you see someone who's like completely clearly what an American might say is black or white, right? There's often some kind of combination there.
Yeah, we even have this joke about this Brazilian guy who goes to the US, you know, and he comes back and says like, look, I don't know what the problem people talk about racism in America. Everywhere that I went, you know, the black guys went and gave me the fist up, you know, and the joke being that the guy in Brazil thought he was white, but abroad he was obviously seen as black. So what it means to be what in Brazil is slightly different than in the US. But the thing about Brazil is that the sheer number is way beyond any, like, for example, to have an idea, the amount of Africans that were brought to Brazil was just in Brazil was the same as the whole rest of the Americas, you know? So like of all slaves that came to the Americas, half of them went to Brazil, you know? And
huge trauma there, right? I mean, like that trauma in the body that's there, you know, just from the voyage, on top of that, all the shit that happened to people. I mean, like, do you think that still plays out in some ways today? Do you think that's in people's embodiment in some ways? Like, there's a lot of people talking about this, but I've never heard anyone in Brazil talk about this.
It's coming out big time with the whole, you know, this combination of this perfect storm with like 1929 crisis together with the Spanish flu at the same time, and all this. Things are really erupting in Brazil at the moment because it has the history, like the own making of Brazil is like this idea of this really cool country with, so you get taught this history, but when you look a little bit deeper, it's much deeper. I mean, Brazil was the last country in the Americas to end slavery.
Yeah.
And also the way they end slavery was, it's a very good parallel to what they are trying to do nowadays, right? Because the first thing that they did the law of the 60 years. What that meant? It meant that once you were a slave over 60, you were free.
Okay.
And the parallel is more or less what they wanted to do with Social Security, say your pensions, right? So they after you worked all your life, the slave owner had no more duty to that guy. He was basically on his own now.
Okay, so you're 60, you can't work in the fields anymore. You're on your own. It doesn't say.
You know, and I don't have to feed you anymore. You know, and then they did the same with the the law of the free at birth, because the first 7-10 years of that kid, you cannot really earn from it, so you have to feed him. And then what it said, like, okay, so they freed the over 60s, then they freed those who at birth, which basically make the slave have to fend for their own, you know, siblings, instead of the slave master being, you know, and then only eventually that they I think, was the last country in Americas to have the thing done. And then, you know, they were just left to be, you know, there's never been any housing, you know, system. So if you look at even the people who fought in wars, they were not, you know, looked after. That's why the favelas, the ghettos, comes from, you know, the end of Brazil as an empire and the beginning of Brazil as a republic. That's the first, like, when people start moving to the cities and going to the hills and have their own shacks, put it together, you know. It's better, but
it feels good to get another perspective. You know, often I hear, you know, British perspective, I hear American perspective, everybody bloody hears, and it's like, you know, I've got a bit of Japanese perspective, but somehow like South America gets missed out somehow. You know what I mean? Like it's not, people don't know what it's like to be Chilean or Argentinian or Brazilian. You know what I mean? And it gets that perspective is not really, it doesn't quite fit in most people's narrative somehow. It's a little bit like ignored somehow. And the same in embodiment world, you know, it's difficult to get South American instructors for the conference, and we have to kind of really go looking, you know, and then there's the language barrier there, and there's even a language barrier within South America, right, between Portuguese and Spanish. So it's